So Ian has played Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for us and is reviewing it. So Ian, does Rebirth live up to Remake? Like, the first game was absolutely incredible. I think the expectations for this next game are so high. Just in a sentence, does it match your expectations?
Yeah, definitely. They comfortably take some of the gripes that people had with Remake and very much remedy it here in Rebirth, and the experiences all the better for it.
Fill your hollow heart with rage.
So I think the biggest difference is Remake was quite linear, and there's a larger open world with this game. We can talk about the other differences as well, but I think that's the first thing that fans are going to notice, being able to go to the places that they remember from Final Fantasy VII, but also these places look quite different, and the way that you play in those spaces are quite different. How does the, quote, open world work in Rebirth?
If the idea of Final Fantasy VII Remake was to kind of give Midgar all the scope and attention it deserves, I think Final Fantasy Rebirth is all about like that grand step out moment. And obviously a big step out moment is essentially not only nailing the open world that I don't think Remake was stellar for, and I think that was probably the task at hand for this. So the biggest things you'll kind of notice is, I guess it's more accurate to kind of call it more like open zones. Like you kind of come across various regions, and each one of those regions has various sort of things to do. I think the main thing that really benefits is the side content, because I remember with Remake, it can feel very just sort of fetch questy, very go here, get the item, come back. And then in Rebirth, they kind of attack it with a bit more variety. I use kind of like one quest as a good example because it kind of like explains a few working parts here. So one sort of side quest that you get in the first area, essentially all you're really doing is you go and talk to the bar person and they say, oh, like I've lost my favorite card, so somebody can go get it for me. And what then plays out is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has a new sort of card game called Queen's Blood. And essentially all you're doing is going and challenging a few people to a game of Queen's Blood. Each kind of side quest, you'll notice that your companion takes an interest in it. So for example, Tifa takes an interest because obviously at times being a bartender. So you kind of have these kind of conversations with her, and that kind of adds a little bit more sort of like depth to sort of her character. Your relationship with Tifa sort of enhances. And because your relationship with her enhances, that actually kind of feeds back into the gameplay because you kind of have this new bonds system, this sort of Final Fantasy X style sort of like sphere grid. And the more that you kind of fight with them, do these kind of side quests that sort of matter to them and other various things, you kind of get these sort of points that you can sort of feed in, and you kind of get these sort of more subtler buffs. So some of them are massive, some of them are like these kind of combo moves, so sure, will look a little bit familiar if you played Chrono Trigger, for example. So like, and there's all these like different ideas kind of feeding in together, but I think the kind of point it comes back to is that like it kind of makes doing side content a bit more like meaningful. So it's more just like if you're kind of going along and doing the story, then it's sort of like, well, actually doing the side content is worthwhile because obviously you get the experience points, it makes you stronger, and it kind of keeps you above the recommended level, which gives you an easier time in the game, but it kind of also feeds back into the actual gameplay itself. It kind of makes your party a bit stronger, but it also gives you something narratively. So depending on what you actually come to the game for, there's lots of benefits like that.
More importantly, the other part of it is you can take different characters on dates, and some fans may love this, some fans may feel that this is sacrilege. You can take Tifa out on a date, or Aerith, and they will also mention the fact that you've taken the other one out. So it seems to kind of close off certain loops of, oh, well, if you're romancing Tifa, you can't romance Aerith. Who did you take on a date? And please tell me you took Barrett on a date. I don't even know if that's possible, but I hope it is.
In short, sort of yes and yes, like the sort of gold saucer date is back, but it's not quite like a simple case of just getting to like the gold saucer and them sort of being like, who do you want to take out on a date? I understand, like it kind of depends on like who your bond is strongest with. When I went to the gold saucer for like the first time, like it was Tifa who kind of like came around, and there was sort of like, we kind of went around the gold saucer and we tried a few different things, and I was kind of speaking to somebody else who went through the exact same moment, I think they were basically like kind of just beelining the story, so they weren't doing all the side content, whereas like I was doing all like the side content. So in my case at that point, I think that might have meant that my relationship with Tifa was the strongest, or simply that when the dialogue used came up with Tifa, that I picked the right ones. Whereas I spoke to this other sort of person and they were saying that actually no one came calling for them when they went to the gold saucer for the first time, so...
Wait, so wait, hold on. That's great. So it wasn't even like, oh, Aerith is the default. It's like, no. No one came up to me because clearly I had not had a strong enough bond with anyone.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
I think that really shows how kind of like deep this game is. And it's that thing of like you said, that you said, I didn't know exactly, there isn't a bit where it goes, who do you want to take on a date? It's much more subtle than that. You're not really sure how you got Tifa, you think it could have been this. So there's clearly a lot going on in the background, but again, there's this really nice thing where it's not obvious. So it's kind of natural and it just happens and it's kind of organic. I'm not going to talk too much about the story and too much about that mechanics. I don't want to spoil too much for people. Stuff happens in the original around this timeline in the original game, and I also know that in this game also other stuff's going to happen. It doesn't seem like from what you said that they're doing massive changes that are going to rock the foundations of the Final Fantasy fan base.
I feel like if you look at Final Fantasy VII Remake and you look at it up with the lens of this is its own thing, the original is still widely available, it doesn't matter if this goes off the rails a bit, like it's engrossing and never boring at the least, then, you know, just like Remake, you'll probably be fine with Rebirth. But I think if you're still a little sort of like, you know, I don't want them messing with my Final Fantasy, then, you know, obviously, like, I think Rebirth is a lot like Remake. Like, it is 90% just a very, like, faithful, like, remake of the original. There's just this 10% that they've kind of just added in this, like, extra kind of storyline.
They do tweak the story and they do play with it. So if you're precious about people playing with your Final Fantasy, you might have an issue.
It's just like, I don't think they even tweak or change anything. Like, I think there's just a certain point where, like, the new stuff interacts with the old stuff, and it doesn't change anything, but it does just make it a bit more, like, convoluted.
More importantly, let's talk about the combat. How does it feel combat-wise?
Square Enix isn't really messing with a good thing. I think a lot of people sort of found Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat to be that kind of happy hybrids between modern action, sort of hack and slash, but delivered in a way that still respects that active time battle sort of heritage. At its core, it still works very similar. There's still lots of pods for that tactical element that I think lots of people enjoyed from older Final Fantasy games and from Remake. So I will say that, by and large, Rebirth doesn't really mess with like a good thing. Like, there's a little bit of that added extra on top. Like, as we kind of went over, you have the synergy abilities now, and you kind of have that, like, where you can kind of like get a few extra buffs in that regard. So there is some small subtle changes, but I think top line I'd basically say that I think Square Enix is not trying to mess with a good thing when it comes to combat.
So the first game in Remake just covered Midgar. This is trying to cover a much more wider breadth of the story, but we still don't know where it ends. We have ideas. How much filler is there, and how long does it take to play through roughly, or like how core is this? What are we experiencing in the Final Fantasy VII so far?
Sure. So to start with, like how long it takes, my save file is currently 70 plus hours.
Okay, how much of that is just you playing Queen's Gambit games?
60 hours probably. I've not done like absolutely everything, but like my approach to the review was to basically do all the side quests in each zone, because there's these various sort of life springs that will kind of give you intel over the location. But if you get enough life springs, like, that will also take you to like the grand enemy of the area, or the grand fiend.
Oh, so they got like mini bosses, mini side bosses.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously some are more recognizable than others. Like, one sort of zone, like the grand enemy is like the Tonberry, of course, because it kind of felt like it had to be, which I'm sure lots of people get a kick out of. I finished the game with around 70 hours, but with a bit more to do. Square Enix has said that like if you're just beelining the story, it will probably take you 40 hours. And whilst I think that sounds just about right, I think you will get like level checks every now and then, and you will probably hit the point where you're like, okay, like bosses are getting quite difficult, I should probably do some more side content. So maybe 40 hours at its best if you can manage it. And I think sort of Square Enix was also saying that if you do absolutely everything, it'd be 100 hours, and that would basically cover it. As for filler content, you'll find that you'll just get sucked into like lots of like fun and very silly like little antics. Like at one point you reach Junon and you have to like rally the troops together to take part in like in a parade and a mini game. Like when you kind of hop aboard the ship to Costa del Sol, like you take part in like a cards tournament, which is partly their way of being like, here's optional content, but we're weaving it into the main story to kind of like get you to engage with it.
But is it done well enough that it's that kind of thing where you're playing it and you're having fun, but then only afterwards do you realize, wait, hold on, the great thing that I did had nothing to do with the main story. How is this helping X, Y, and Z? And you kind of realize it and go, oh, it didn't. But I kind of don't care because it was fun.
Like, that's exactly the vibe. It is just sort of like, is what I'm doing like serving like the progress of the main narrative? No, probably not. But like, it's so like fun and silly that you're just sort of like, I actually don't mind at all.
So in general, it seems like while there is still filler content, the filler content quality has definitely improved, and your bonds with your team and the story writing and the writing is also fantastic as well. So that all kind of synergizes into a nice game where you don't mind spending 70 to 100 hours in it. With all that in mind, what score have you given it out of 5?
I'm going to give it 4.5 stars out of 5.
Oh, well, I'm really glad that it's not been a disappointment. I didn't think it would be, but there was always... The expectation is always so high from everybody playing these games that I think that's the problem. It's not that it was never going to be a bad game. I just think that the expectation was so high. We're going to have some guides on the site for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, so check out GamesRadar if you get stuck or if you need any tips.